These are dark times. For some of us, they always have been. Yet there is resilience in our places, wisdom in our streets, the desire to resist, to care, to be together again. We can harness this critical moment. Our stories of ruin, resistance, and renewal will light the way forward. Join us at the SF Urban Film Fest.
Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the 7th Annual SF Urban Film Fest. My name is Susie Smith. I am a documentary filmmaker, installation artist, and curator program producer with the SF Urban Film Fest. Our mission is to use film to inspire conversation and action around urban issues. Our core team includes our founder and executive director, Faye Darmawi. Ron Sundstrom is our humanities advisor, and our program producers are Robin Abad and Omid Manucheri. And our newest member is Crystal Chelik, who is our festival manager this year, and we are so thankful for her. I'd also want to give a shout out to Hannah Moore, who is our marketing guru, and all of our volunteers.
Hi, and I'm Melinda James, a filmmaker, cinematographer, and the co-curator of this program. We hope you've had a chance to watch the films Where To With History, Spirit Never Dies, Only Transitions, and Landmark 5, as well as the shorts about EJI's Community Remembrance Project and the Mass Design Group's UK Holocaust Memorial Proposal. These films are all available on our website and provide important context for this conversation. If you haven't watched the films, you still have time and can access them through a sliding scale rental pass until Sunday. Our panel program will begin in a moment, but first, a few announcements. We are all used to navigating virtual events, so unpredictable things may happen. Thanks for your patience. If you have any issues, please leave a message in the comment box.
So we want to thank all our members who are joining us tonight and keep our community growing. If you'd like to become a member, it's easy to do via our website. Also, you can donate on our website. This year, our festival is mostly pay what you can so that as many people as possible can access our programs. We will also be putting a chat in the, putting a survey for you to fill out in the chat. It's important that we get as many survey responses as possible so we can understand who we are reaching and how we can make sure to be serving our diverse and wonderful audiences even better. The SF Urban Film Fest is definitely a place-based program, so it's especially important for us to acknowledge that here I am living as a guest on unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. We are presenting this land acknowledgement to promote visibility for Ramaytush Ohlone and all American Indians living and thriving today in their ancestral homelands.
I would also like to acknowledge my presence on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Gabrielino Tongva peoples, now known as Los Angeles.
So tonight we are so honored to bring you this program and panel, which was born out of conversations Melinda and I were having a lot about mourning, monuments, and love. I've personally been drawn to thinking about memorials and mourning starting actually in the late 90s when I was studying about memorials in Germany to those lost in the Holocaust, killed Jews that were murdered, and the way that they were dealing with absence and acknowledging the pain and the killing that they had been done there. So here in the US, I wasn't seeing monuments that reflected our history and the ongoing legacy of slavery and persecution, but instead I was seeing fights over removing monuments to slaveholders and Confederate generals. With the National Memorial for Peace and Justice and the Legacy Museum in Birmingham, led by EJI, It finally seemed like there was a moment in the US that was asking for active engagement with the legacy of slavery, lynching, racism, and incarceration in our country.
In my own film work, and those of so many of my peers, we are exploring ideas around expressions of love and the Black experience that focuses on joy and resilience and does not center Black pain. So in our conversations, we were really trying to get at how do these almost opposite tactics come together? If memorials and monuments are how we share and shape a collective narrative, how are certain narratives being told? In what ways can memorials and rituals be a space of joy, to generate new ways of what we want to see in the future, and to make these practices active sites of reconciling the truth about our past?
So in this program, we chose films that examine these questions, panelists on the forefront of thinking about memorials, and curated an installation that can be experienced in person and COVID safely in the windows and exterior walls of YBCA in San Francisco. The three artists on this panel all have work showing, as does Melinda and several other artists and filmmakers. So we encourage you to take a look. There's night at night, there are films projected very wide, and then during the day there's also lots of things to come, and you can just walk around and see it.
I'd also like to mention that the installation that's on display at YBCA right now was helmed and curated by our very own Susie Smith. So even more reason to check out the work in person. Thank you all for listening to us, and now we would like to introduce our moderator for the evening, Bryan C. Lee Jr. Bryan C. Lee Jr. is an architect, educator, writer, design justice advocate, and organizer with a focus on spatial justice in the built environment. He's a co-founder and director of Colloquate, a multidisciplinary nonprofit design justice practice focused on expanding community access to and building power through the design of public, civic, and cultural spaces. He is also known for the design justice platform, the Paper Monuments Project in New Orleans, and Design as Protest National Day of Action. Bryan, thank you for joining us. We're so honored to have you here as the moderator of this discussion.
Thank you for having me. I really do appreciate it. This has been a blessing and an honor to be in this space, and so I want to again thank you for inviting me to moderate this incredible panel this evening. I want to start off with just a few words, and then we will get into the panel. We have a few presentations as well, just to kind of keep us grounded in who we are as a people. So there's a way that our humanity actually reads through the work that you're going to see presented tonight. Again, it is an honor to be your moderator this evening and to share the stage with Ada, Cheyenne, and Tatyana for this panel, How We Mourn, Where We Remember. We are in this space tonight to discuss the inherent kind of connections between memory, between place, and the ways that we acknowledge those particular spaces as spaces of healing, as spaces of trauma, as spaces of jubilee and fun and love, all of those other kind of components that shape our cultural existence within space. This is a particularly resonant time to be doing this work, but everyone on this panel has been doing this over time. Right, and so this isn't a moment in time for the panelists. This is a moment that reflects the totality or the kind of the wider breadth of their work. And so, personally, we're going to take a little bit of time here to ask a few questions, dig a little deeper as to how these conversations, what those relationships are, and then we will again open this up a little bit more from there. So I'm going to start by just giving you a little bit of a quick presentation about who I am, and then each of the panelists will do the same, and we'll get into the larger panel. Go ahead and pull that up. So while we're talking about this, I just wanted to just ground ourselves in the fact that everything we do is centered on the kind of sequence of people and place habitually juxtaposed at a greater frequency than chance. And I wanted to note that, because as we're talking about how we heal and how culture kind of shapes our space in this world, it will help us kind of root this larger conversation. So I'll share just a few slides of our work, and then we'll share it around a little bit. So I come to this work through both through a background in architecture and a background in organizing. Our work is grounded in some of that organizing that allowed us to kind of deal with the ephemeral, right? This is a die-in that happened in 2015. This was in New Orleans after Mike Brown was murdered. The reflections on some of that work around how we protest began to really invest themselves in the physicality of space, and how might we think about memorials in different ways, whether those things were quick ephemeral conditions in which people can put up memorials to those who have lost their lives to police violence, to white supremacy in general. How can we experience and acknowledge the kind of cultural adaptations that people bring to this world relative to mourning? This is a picture of us organizing a second line around the death of community. And so this is around housing as a mode of extinguishing those neighborhoods and communities. What happens when we actually reflect on the words of communities through a project we call Paper Monuments, that was really about the monumentality of particular community stories and community narratives. How do we reflect those back to community in some instance? How do we allow those narratives and acknowledge that those narratives get washed away sometimes by humans, by weather, by the elements in general? How do we build on those and project speculative futures that tell, again, as we talked about earlier, not just stories of pain, but stories of joy? How might we imbue those things into our physical environment? And how might we build those at the scale of community members, at the scale of our youth, our elders, and the like? And so these are the things that we expect to see from our work. And we hope that, again, we can talk about the entire spectrum of that work in other aspects. So I'm going to stop sharing and pass it off to Ada, I believe.
Hello. Thank you for sharing your work. And thank you to everyone from the San Francisco Film Festival, or San Francisco Urban Film Festival, for inviting us to have this conversation. I am going to share my screen, and I am in this digital platform with you guys in Baltimore, Maryland, which is unceded Piscataway territory. I am, do you guys see my screen? Do you see the image?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. All right, cool. So I see myself as an unbound mixed media artist, and I make work to wake us up to face our time and recognize the invisibility of whiteness, the invisibility of intersectional oppression, the imaginary of whiteness, and the visibility of the constructs of power and race and the material realities of class. Through my work, I'm really interested in rewriting the canon, canonical accounts of history through collaboration, digital media, and immersive installations. So I just showed a couple of slides of work that I've done over the past 6 years. Currently, I'm working on this project called Landmark. And this project started after the Confederate monuments in Baltimore City were removed. And but the project itself started in 2018. And to date, I've created this space for reflection on monuments and public sites in Baltimore and Dallas and DC. And I'm creating this archive of what is our general response to the architecture of the monument, right? So in this process, I'm thinking about how to take this visceral experience of applying pens to paper and how to have this dialogue outside of the social media or this digital context. And, you know, it's interesting to have these stacks of papers in my house, but it's also important to think about how do we visualize all of this non-quantifiable data. But the other phase of Landmarked is a series of performances. And this performance is really an ephemeral monument to the life and work of Fannie Lou Hamer. And I'm thinking about, in this work, I was thinking about bending the space and time continuum that merges and ends this 19th century story of the lost cause with the voice and the rigor of the work of Fannie Lou Hamer. Because, you know, obviously there's not as many monuments to Fannie Lou Hamer as there should be in the United States, but it's but this ephemeral moment was a moment to have it exist in on top of the place where this Confederate monument was removed. So I'm thinking through like critical fabulations, right? This idea of taking the space that is unknown about the past and thinking through how to imagine outside of that space that is unknown, but also breathe life into it. So this was a proposal for a monument for the 272 people that were enslaved by Jesuit priests in 1838. Without the sale of these people, the institution of Georgetown would not exist. Due to a last minute change of plans, this work wasn't installed at Georgetown, but it was installed at the Arts and Industries building. And it was a 4-channel sound installation that featured the voices of present day descendants. So I'm really interested in thinking through how to connect, right? Because the stories of the past are connected to the present and clear and through spirit, right? This story is also related to the question of reparations in the context of the United States, which is a whole other conversation when we think about memory and mourning, but also how do we celebrate, right? How do we celebrate survival? This piece was about the life and times of Mary Joseph Angelique, who was a woman that burned down the city of Old Montreal in an attempt to become free. And I am really interested. I'm very much interested in thinking through like how to uplift the narratives of resilience and the narratives of outside of that, like you just said, Bryan, like outside of the context of this pain and suffering. How do we uplift the stories of resilience? So to close, one question I have is I'm constantly working with is how do we care about the people in our present day more than we care about the objects, right? And how do we continue to conjure and continue to manifest these critical fabulations in this space of seemingly insurmountable structures that would prefer that we remain silenced. So there's that. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you. That was fantastic. So we are going to bring onto the stage next up Cheyenne.
Hi, everyone. I'm Cheyenne Concepcion, and I'm not in control of my slides, so if you guys can project those, cool. So hi, everyone. Thank you for having me today at SF Urban Film Festival, and thank you for bringing together such thought leaders on the topic. I'm super excited. I am an artist and designer based in San Francisco. I work across different mediums, from installation to social practice to photography, image making, sculpture, and textile work. But ultimately, my work is about place and all that comes with it. You know, place is physical, but it's also mental and spiritual and political and social. And place is full of myth. And my work really tries to unpack that in a lot of different ways, in all the ways that you could possibly try to. So I'm showing you 4 projects here that definitely do that. On the top left is a project from 2018 called Carry On. It's with Walter Hood, and it's a permanent installation at San Diego International Airport. We worked with the airport to go through their lost and found, to kind of rummage through and take photos of objects left behind. And so we took the photos and recomposed them onto the edifice to kind of bring back that memory and kind of bring back a story about a lost memory. And so that's one aspect of memory that I worked with in 2018. A more recent project called The Essentials from just last year was a project where I just walked around my neighborhood. I kind of used my daily quarantine walk to take portraits of essential workers in my neighborhood. And the project kind of touches, or very much touches, on the dichotomy between being essential but also being accessorial. And it touches on race and labor in my neighborhood, which happens to be San Francisco's coronavirus epicenter, non-coincidentally a Latin neighborhood in San Francisco. The projects below are part of a Borderlands series that started in 2017 that still continues today. On the right, I have a project called Borderlands National Park, where I kind of wanted to question the concept of contested lands or protected lands in this contested environment. So I did site-specific installations around monuments of colonialism and security architecture, and kind of recontextualized them and reframed them as tourist destinations or relics of American excellence. And then I created a whole tourism campaign to visit my fictional national park, and kind of co-opted the National Park Service's patriotic language for all the materials. It was a cheeky project that tried to blur the lines between environmental racism, land protection, land grabbing, and also patriotism and nationalism in the vessel of a national park. And that cheeky project kind of led to a more serious project about memory called Borderlands Archive. Borderlands Archive is a project that traces connection across territorial divide through the collection of objects and artifacts. These objects are mundane objects, everyday objects that have crossed not just the southern border, but the Canadian border, and through planes and all the travel that comes with migration. And it kind of takes these ordinary objects and treats them as historical objects. In this picture, they're displayed in a museum in New York City, the Parsons School of Design, as part of the Museum of Capitalism. But all these objects have a really interesting history and a movement pattern that is hard to kind of grasp with 2D imagery. So that's just one example of my memory work. Next slide, please. But what I'm here today about is a project that also I started in 2020 called New Monuments Task Force. And New Monuments Task Force is a critical response to a tumultuous summer for San Francisco's monuments. A lot went down politically, socially, not just topplings, but within the institutions in the city. And it was so bad that the city of San Francisco came out and said that they would establish a task force and create a study around monuments and, quote unquote, their intersection with our country's racist history. And so naturally, I decided to co-opt that task force and create my own. And so I used, I work with artists I've worked with, friends I've worked with, designers, co-conspirators, created a task force. I even invited folks that I have never met who are also doing the work in the city or in Oakland. And this task force is kind of like a brain trust that serves as a curatorial committee for the report that we created, which was also co-opted. Next slide, please. So the report we created kind of came about in the form of zine publications and two-part zine publications. The first part was kind of a presentation of research. I aggregated all the monuments in the Civic Art Collection in San Francisco and started just doing typology studies, organizing them by their theme and topic. As you can see in the top right corner, it was one of the most blatant examples of all the men monuments, the monuments to men in the city, and then the monuments to women. There's 3, and over 60 on the other hand. And so that's just one example of the kind of the groups that we created as part of this zine publication. But what the zine did was also kind of kick off a public participation process. Next slide, please. And as part of the zine, I put out a kind of questionnaire and survey to residents of San Francisco and beyond about asking questions that I didn't feel like were being asked in the city. Everyone was kind of focused on who the most racist man was in terms of monuments, but no one was really asking deeper questions about if monuments change our worldview at all, and what our relationship to them is, and what monuments in the future could look like or should look like, or things that have been forgotten over time. So we put out a survey, and this is in coronavirus times. So we did a print survey and a digital one, but the digital one took off much more fruitfully than the print one. And we had an overwhelming response of SF residents and beyond about kind of commenting on what they wanted their monuments to be. And so, next slide, please. All of the participation reflections got compiled into a second publication, and the curatorial committee met to kind of create recommendations for not just the city, but for the people in general about what new monuments must do or not do. And those are being projected on the side of YBCA as part of this SF Urban Film Festival. So if you want to check that out. And my last slide. So the second zine kind of serves as a guiding document for future projects, because New Monuments Task Force is really a platform to create more work. It's like a conceptual vessel to kind of attack these questions in different ways. And right now, starting this week, we just kicked off a program called Marble in Media, where we are commissioning 8 emerging artists from the Bay Area to reckon with monuments covered in the Relic Report. And we're just starting our process now and hope to present a public exhibition in a couple months. So stay tuned for that. And I will pass it along to Tatyana. Thank you so much.
Hello, hi everyone. Happy to be here with you all tonight. Thank you to Susie and Melinda for inviting me to be a part of this panel, but also a part of the installation that's at YBCA, that's part of the program. I will be showing you all images from that installation. I I too do not have access to my sharing. So, oh, there we go. Could we, we'll start right there, that's fine. So a bit about myself. I am an artist. I'm based in Brooklyn, New York, from Oklahoma City, Oklahoma originally. I am mostly a public artist, though I'm also an oil painter and illustrator. I paint and I draw, essentially, for the most part, in different types of formats, in different spaces, in different environments. A lot of my work is based in portraiture and figures. I'm interested in telling the stories and the experiences of everyday people. It's interesting being a part of this. I was excited to be a part of this, but it is sort of a new space for me, thinking about memory, thinking about memorials, thinking about mourning. Most of my work is, based around the experiences of everyday, real life, living people, and what their experiences are. I've honestly a lot been sort of opposed to the idea of portraying dead folks, especially dead Black folks, especially dead Black folks that have been killed by racist violence, police violence. And that's mostly because I don't want to perpetuate that our lives are only valuable once they are gone. I'm really interested in portraying the value and the love and the joy and the celebration of people who are here while they are here. But I also recognize the importance of memory and memorials of Black folks as a sort of recognition of love as well, which I think sort of pushes back against how Black folks have been portrayed. It gives the idea that we are loved. I think when you share a memory of someone, you're sort of holding that person in sort of high esteem. And to do that for Black folks, I think is very important to do. So what we're seeing here is a public art piece that I did over the summer. NPR has a space here in New York called the Green Space, and they had these available walls that they asked me to do something on. This was the top of June, so this is when we were sort of at the height of the protest for George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. I had to think about this, for a while before I did it. What I found is that during that time, and even since then, I think people are asking artists and creators to do something out of the urgency of the moment. And doing something out of the urgency of the moment has its place, but it also feels very reactionary. And it also feels like it isn't giving much time or space to really sort of consider and to really think about and to contemplate on the lives of the people that we're asked to portray. And I found that to be a challenge, when I think of creating memorial pieces, especially public art pieces, how much of it is it a reaction? Is it political? Is it social? And how much of it is sitting and taking time to really sort of look at the lives of these people and to sort of create something out of that, as opposed to creating something out of a political moment. I was doing these pieces as sort of an experimentation. I don't often work in collage, I usually just draw. And so I was taking these images of these folks, Breonna Taylor, Tatyana, and I wanted to look at them and play around with them. So I was cutting them up and I was writing their names and I was adding drawings of flowers and sort of putting it together and seeing what I could create here. And I came up with these pieces. I think we know all of these names, but sometimes some names stick with you more than others. And Tatyana has stuck with me for years. Breonna was sticking with me. Tony, Noni, Nina were all sticking with me. And so I created these pieces. We can go to the next slide. I'm gonna sort of move quickly here so that we can move on. This is a piece that is also new for me. I do a lot of street art work, wheat pasting, posters on walls. And what I have found over the years is that people will write on my work. And so this piece, I was inviting people to write on the work, to engage with the work. I am mourning, I'm grieving, I miss. Over the past year, I have been dealing with a lot of grief, a lot of mourning, and I know that a lot of people are as well. But I'm particularly interested in how Black people are mourning and what we are mourning. And so I placed these in Black neighborhoods and just sort of like wanted to see what would happen as a way for us to collectively grieve, to walk by this and to see that other people are also grieving, also mourning at the same time as you are. And perhaps they miss something just as the same that you miss. We can go to the next slide. The next slide as well. The next slide. Again, these are pieces that we can see now at YBCA that are there in the installation. To sort of wrap up, my work is, thinking about mourning and thinking about memory, but thinking about it in a sort of collective way. What does it mean for Black people to mourn, and who are we mourning, and what are we mourning? Sort of thinking about the constant ache that I think a lot of us have when it comes to the death of Black folks, the constant death of Black folks, and how to put up work in the public space that allows for us to do that mourning and doing that grieving together. This is, again, sort of new, but these are the thoughts that I'm having and the questions that I'm asking myself. So I'm happy to be in this panel, and perhaps we can talk about some of that tonight. Thank you.
Tatyana, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. That was fantastic. That was the exact way we needed to start this conversation. I'm gonna ask a few questions and really let us run with the conversation. There were so many really, really important things that you all kind of touched base on. But as a start, I want to ask a question that revolves around the kind of humanity of this work. Tatyana, you mentioned, you spoke a little bit about the kind of conflict of dealing with moments that reflect the living versus moments or memory spaces or memory pieces of art that reflect those who have passed, and having a kind of conflict in oneself around that. And we had talked about this in our previous conversations, but Alex Haley cribbed a line from Amadou Habatiba that talks about the fact that every time a griot dies, a library burns to the ground, which is cribbed, but it's also not reflective of the actual comment, which is really talking about the fact that when a traditionalist dies or a griot dies, it's like a underdeveloped cultural archive is failing, basically. And so there's two things that come out of that. One is like the translation of words and how one person might reflect a heated exchange versus one might reflect the more passive exchange. And the other thing, I guess, is the relationship to kind of the physicality of space. And so I pose this question, like, in your work, how have you rationalized, and this is kind of more broadly, how do you rationalize the relationship between humans and then in the built environment and the necessity of memory as an act of mourning, as an act of healing, and an act of like projected futures? I'm going to point that question at Tatyana first.
I think what's interesting about this question is the first half of it. I find that quote really layered. And it really makes me think of the importance, like I was saying, of talking to people while they are here. I think that, what happens when someone passes is that we lose their memories, we lose their stories, we lose everything that they have to offer. And so that's why it's important to talk to people while they are here now. I think that my work is trying to place some clarity on the experience that we have as Black folks, as women, as queer folks, the experiences that we are having right now today. It's very much so about the present. But I think that even when you're talking about the present, you sort of are also talking about history as well. You know, our present experiences are based on history. And in doing so, you're also talking about the future. This is what I'm experiencing in the present moment. This is what my life is like in the present moment. What does that mean for the future? How do I want it to be in the future? And so all of these things are sort of happening at the same time. I think that's why it's important to document, sort of create an archive, right now of people. I think that this is how I am sort of approaching memory, I think, in my sort of everyday practice, in that sense of, trying to create a document or an archive of what people are doing and experiencing now, so that we have this, that we value their lives while they are here today.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, Ada? You got anything to add?
Yeah, actually, so I didn't mention this, but the Mary Joseph piece was made literally in response to the fact that there is no marker for her in Montreal. There is no monument for her in Montreal, right? Like the built environment does not reflect her story. And then pedagogy, right? Public school pedagogy does not reflect her story either. But it's important, right? So like if you Google her name, then they say, oh, there's a monument to Mary Joseph Angelique. But if you go to the place where it is in downtown, the marker isn't there. Then I went to the tourist office and I was like, hey, where is this so-called monument for Mary Joseph? They were like, what? Who is that? So I think, but it's important, but I think it's important to recognize, because it's part of these it's like the cultural tools of war in essence, right? Like, because there are all these other markers for these French people that, so supposedly founded Canada, right? So it's like, and I think that it's important, because her story was one of strength and resilience, right? Like she was a fighter, right? And, so I think that that's something that I'm constantly working with, but also trying to reconcile, right? But also this past and the present we're not in a vacuum, right? So like with the GU Tapes 272 project, like the case for reparations is still on the table, right? Like that hasn't been resolved, but it's like, there's a mirroring effect, right? Like the complete disrespect for our memories is in direct opposition to complete disrespect in the present day, right?
Yeah, that's beautiful. I mean, I think the notion of the griot in general is one who holds both past, present, and future, right? They use, there's this the way in which memory often gets transcribed in us, whether it is in a book, whether we take it on as narrative or we take it on as parable, right? Like the parable itself is the collection of a series of narratives, right? And so those are put there so that we can project a future, right? We can project a future forward. And so I think that's an interesting way you phrase that. So Cheyenne, so speaking of projecting futures, in your work, you have established a multitude of ways in which you are projecting both in the past and the kind of small, intimate moments of loss, whether it's luggage and personal items to the kind of larger, more collective asks of a projected future in space with the New Monuments Task Force. Is there anything you kind of want to add to that set of conversations?
Yes, thank you. What Ada said about memorialization and of the individual, I feel like my project, Borderlands Archive, and these like everyday objects and the memorialization of everyday stories, as with the griot, is something that I'm trying to focus on too. I feel like we often memorialize individuals, and an individual is supposed to represent an entire movement. But what about the stories of the most mundane day-to-day kind of memories that we pass from one to another? And I feel like a couple of my projects try to unpack that in different ways. I'm thinking about Borderlands Archive, but also Carry On as kind of just the most quietest testaments to, our daily existence and also the places that we remember.
Yeah. and like that just intimate loss, right? Like that strikes me in the way that, you know, some of the hardest times I've ever had are sitting in an airport with no bag and not knowing where I'm going to go, and you know, having those like small little traumas as well, I think are additive to one space. So yeah, I think there's Ada, you got something on your mind?
No, I don't think, I was just going to say, I don't think it's mutually exclusive either, right? I think it should be all of the things, right? Like, how do we really think through like pushing past these architectures that are tired anyways, right? But also there's something that's powerful about the narrative, like how, you know, like the narrative, right, of strength, of, I mean, or also, I mean, we were talking about this, all of us were talking about this, right? Like talking about like Carnival and Comfa and you know, Mardi Gras, those are also monuments, right? And that's multiple people are experiencing this in public space. So that's like, that's a social public architecture, right? I don't know, I just made that up, but you know.
Yeah. No, that's real. Like, so actually, let's speak to that a little bit, because I think the other question I was thinking about is how these stories and how these works are dealing at multiple scales and multiple medias. Right. So you've used projection media. You've used a kind of a multitude of different medias to do this work, performance, so on and so forth. Can you speak to that to your thought process and how you're using your art, both in an ephemeral way and and its projection into like a more permanent consideration?
It's not permanent.
Yeah, ever.
It's not. It's like that's part of our cultural production praxis, right? It's always a momentary. It is always an ephemeral. But it's our goal is to have this experience, or to develop this experience, or have the audience have this experience with the work, right? And put them on the journey of the story or of the experience that we want, or that I want them to have.
To me, that process seems more reflective of life. I feel like the monuments and memorials as we know them there needs to be a temporality to them. And I feel like projecting into the future, as you kind of asked in the last question, apparently Ada's already onto it. Like there needs to be a temporality, a kind of a time cap on this statement that we're putting into public spaces, you know?
Tatyana?
Yeah, you know, my work is, you know, very temporary, so I do agree with that. I think there's something significant about something being temporary. But I also love permanent work too, and I think that is significant, you know, to create a memorial or a monument that is meant to be permanent, that is meant to be put up in a permanent way. And who that's for, you know, to mark a space and to mark someone's life in a sort of way, in a way that it's permanent. I feel like it's something that I'm interested in. It's not the work that I do. I don't, you know, create public work that is, you know, sculptural, or these sort of like big pieces that are meant to last forever. My work is meant to be temporary, and there's something significant about that. But when I think about monuments, and I think about memorializing people, who we are memorializing and why we are doing that, I would love to just see like some permanent big stuff of like, you know, Black folks and women that are just there and are meant to be there for a long time. You know, yeah, that it wasn't really, I didn't really go anywhere with that, but just to say that I think that there's significance in both, right? You know, temporary work, but also permanent work too, you know, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, so for you, I know you're not in Tulsa, but from the Oklahoma City to Tulsa consideration, when we talk about Greenwood and we talk about the kind of structures that were there, that were burnt down, And most folks don't know that white people ended up building up a whole new set of buildings on top of the ashes of a Black community fairly quickly. Within a year, you'll see some buildings that say 1922 right there. So I think, and I say that to say that there is an effort to memorialize that moment presently, right? So this kind of large scale history that was in place gets burnt down, and now we're on the other side of it, where a symbol is supposed to reflect what was lost over the course of that 100 years. So I think there's some dynamic there that I think wants to be sussed out. I don't know what it is, but
yeah. But you know what? I think also the trap though is that, okay, let's say these monuments, okay, so all the Confederate monuments are being removed, right? But then, or let's say there is a monument that gets erected in Tulsa that commemorates the lives of the people whose houses were burned. Do people get reparations for that? You know what I mean? And that's a trap, right? Or is everybody in Tulsa going to get free healthcare? Or like,
Yeah,
so
I think a lot of it is like in that sense can be sort of just a performance, right? So here's memorial for you, here's this monument for you. Absolutely erases nothing and it does nothing, and we're talking about Greenwood, this is an entire community that was legit burned to the ground, like no building was standing, and we're talking about mass graves of so many people who died and were just buried, that they're starting to excavate these places, and to build on top of that, to build buildings on top of that, to build community and cities on top of that.
I think there's a baseball field there. Right?
There's a baseball field there. There's a baseball field there. No, it doesn't, help the Black folks or, erases the history. And so in that sense, I mean, and so in that sense, with that being an example, it's, how do you memorialize that? How do you sort of create some sort of representation, some sort of art that is a proper sort of looking at what happened to these people, to this, in this moment, to this community. And can you do that genuinely and properly and do it in a way that is significant in a way? I think that these are, questions that we're asking as artists, how to sort of represent that, and then I guess it also, asks the questions of what is the value or the importance of a monument? What is it actually doing? And who is it doing it for? Like, what is it actually doing? So yeah.
Yeah. Are they projective statements or are they reflective statements? Are they a projection of our ideals moving forward, or are they a projection of, what we valued in the past? I mean, I think they can serve as both at times, but that's a pretty deep question to kind of dig into.
In that case, it almost feels like they're trying to seal that off in the past. Like, this happened, now let's move forward. I'm sorry. Okay, we can move on.
Yeah. We talked about the other day that the framing that symbols tie to systems, right? And I think all of you are picking up on that kind of thread of the idea that it can't just be, whatever we do is not just speaking about the humanity of the individuals that might be proposed, but a reflection on the systems that may harm us, that may traumatize us collectively. And I wonder if y'all might speak to how your work is it or is it not kind of speaking to a larger system, or is it kind of isolating the conversation around the individuals or the kind of monuments individually?
I would say I would like for the work to speak to a larger system, right? That's the goal. But at the end of the day, like Nina Simone said this, right? Like the artist's role is to wake us up and face our time, right? So in that way, like we're creating aesthetics to push policy, I would imagine, or to, I think it was a combination of, right? Because sometimes, I mean, even a painting has power, right? Like the way a paint, like how someone could be moved by seeing a painting, that has power, right? So I think for me, it's a combination of all of the above.
Yeah, I think that.
I feel like my
Yes.
work is a conversation with myself, and it may begin at a starting point of an individual monument, but kind of the idea grows into hopefully having a larger effect.
Yeah, I mean, how do we change systems if we don't actually know what they look like, if we can't reflect on them, right? There's a question in the chat that talks about, can the participatory practice we are all doing bridge the divide between an actual reparations and the physical space? Can the making of a ritual space be an active part of creating policy?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the funny thing is when I was working on the GU 272 installation, they had that, they did that hearing about the case for reparations in Congress. Now, it was a performative hearing, but it was still a hearing on the record,
Yeah. I mean, as most hearings are in the House, a lot of them are performative. So yeah, that it's necessary regardless. Yeah. Yeah, I dig that. All right, so I have one more question, and then we can kind of vibe on that. Actually, I have two more questions, but I had mentioned earlier that I talk often about, well, let's skip that one. I was wondering how you perceive your work and the value of kind of a progressive multi-truth. So in that, I mean, a way that we believe that all truths are valid. So like these multi-truths that exist versus kind of a conservative anti-truth, which essentially says that if it's not based on white supremacy or it's not based on kind of an original truth, then it's not valid at all, right? So in other words, how do you see the necessity of this work against the backdrop of white supremacy, against the backdrop of kind of originalism? Is your work challenging that, or is it not? Is it facing white supremacy at all, or is it focused on the representation of Blackness and the like?
I feel like white supremacists have had control of our public spaces and monuments for so long that you almost can't not reckon with the idea of white supremacy and originalism, when kind of working in this space. For me, in my work, it's not the goal, I guess, but it's also unavoidable.
Yeah, I think that, white supremacy and all of the stories that we know in the history of this country, in the history of, society and in our lives is all based on white supremacy. And so it's all a lie. I don't think that there is, I don't think we're presenting truths to push back against an original truth, because that original truth is a lie. If we're talking about this country and we're talking about white supremacy, I think that having multiple stories, multiple narratives I think we all know that that's important. There isn't just one story, there isn't just one narrative, there are a lot. But I think the important ones are the ones that are from the people who are silenced and have been erased intentionally because of white supremacy. So Black folks, brown folks, all of us, marginalized people. And when we tell our story, when we tell our truth, I think we're telling the truth, we're telling, collectively the multiple truths are the truth, that we are human beings, that we matter, that we exist, that we are loved and therefore are deserving to be mourned, that when you kill us, it is not just killing a Black body, quote unquote, as we like to say, Black bodies, you're killing a Black life. And Black people love that Black life. And so we're going to mourn it and we're going to uplift it. And that is the truth. And not the truth that I think white supremacists and the history of white supremacy wants you to believe about who is worthy of being memorialized and who is worthy of having a monument of them, right? And so I think that the work that I'm doing, and it seems like, all of us are doing, is to tell tell the truth of who we are and tell the truth of what our lives are and these experiences are. And I think that that's the truth that's important. And I think that it's sort of, you does push against white supremacy, but like Cheyenne says, that isn't necessarily the point of the work. But it does it, it does it, and it's important that it does it. And I think that if people look closely and they pay attention to it, then that's what they'll see, and that's what they'll sort of get. You have to dig, you have to unpack, even through the work that we're doing. I think that there's a lot of digging and unpacking that needs to work in these stories that we are telling and the people that we are talking about in this work. In doing so, you will see that, the truth is that, we are here and deserving of being mourned and being loved. And that in and of itself pushes against white supremacy.
Yeah, our very survival and liberation is a challenge to white supremacy. Yeah. So I know we only have about 10 minutes left. So I want to ask just one, I guess, a little bit more personal question. This is a time of immense pain and trauma across so much of our lives. We are all cooped up inside. And I wonder how, not just about your work, but about you as human beings, how are you negotiating the kind of lived trauma that we're all experiencing, the kind of collective trauma experiences, but your individual traumas? And do you see those things hindering, helping, sorting your work? Is your work happening regardless of, are you compartmentalizing or are you integrating those conversations? Really, how are you doing as human beings?
I would say yes, all of the above. Again, like I think, at this moment, there's a lot of work that's being loaded on, right? So I actually did a workshop with a woman that started the NAP ministry in Atlanta. I forgot the sister's name, but it was very helpful for me because I was literally in the middle of, like when the pandemic started, I felt like all of my employers were like, oh, okay, you're at home, so I can give you like 30 things now, right? So really this moment has really helped me to think through like what are the modes of self-care and how to incorporate that more in the experience that I create and the artwork that I make, or like how to put the audience through that experience, right? Because but also the traumas were already there, right? Like the traumas were already here. The traumas are already here on a individual scale, but on a societal scale. But this moment really made the traumas a little more clear and present, because you couldn't ignore it anymore, right? So definitely got a lot more intentional with my modes of self-care. So therapy, yoga every day, a nice walk as much as possible, But yeah.
I want to echo this idea of intention, because I feel like with the pandemic in this moment, I've become much more unapologetic about my work and my intentions with my work. Like before, all my projects have always been political and always been about place. I've felt like in the past I've tried to hide it in allegory and in story, but now I just am like, yes, I'm pushing you to do better. Like this is what this is about. And I feel unapologetic as a woman too, a brown woman in this space. And so it's affected my personal life and it's affected my art in a lot of ways too.
Yeah, same. This past year has been very, very hard, for me. And I've been sad a lot. I've been lonely. I've been, all of the things. And I realized that, being an artist who interviews people, interacts with people as the basis for my work. All of the people that I draw and paint are people that I've had conversations with. that is important for my art, but also for me personally. I've realized that doing that was a means of connection for me, to connect with other human beings, to talk about what they go through, knowing that we sort of have a shared experience. And so during this past year, being isolated has, I feel like it sort of has made me sort of had to shift my sort of practice a little bit, but also realizing just how significant, connecting with people during my practice is for me, which is why I created the I am grieving, I am mourning, I miss piece to put out in the street, so that I don't have to carry my grief by myself. It was a way for me to sort of like deal with, what I was feeling and what I sort of going through emotionally, by connecting with other human beings, by asking them, what are you going through? Are you experiencing the same thing? And allowing people the public space to connect with each other on something that is hard, something that is difficult and that's challenging, these challenging emotions that I think a lot of us are feeling. And so it's found its way in my work through that, and, in a quieter and more softer and more tender space, when I'm at home, it's finding its way into my paintings, just being more reflective about who I am as a person in my oil painting work. But it's been challenging, and I've been trying to just say, hey, are you finding it challenging too? How can we connect together on these feelings through my artwork?
Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you all for that. Yeah, I have one more question that I want to kind of leave us with on a projection consideration. I think I mentioned in our previous conversations about, second lines. If you just come to New Orleans and go on a second line, you don't have the history, the story, the narrative that Black people weren't able to bury their dead in the city, and thusly created these forms of mourning, these kind of collective moments of mourning that turned into something in honor of those who have been lost. And so I wonder what the future of collective mourning looks like for us, not just as individuals, but for artists, for society. Is it still wrapped up in the individualized monuments? Is it something else entirely for you?
I love this question.
I didn't give it to you early, so I just wanted to see what you got.
I don't have an answer for it, but I love the question. Because I think, what does it look like, collective mourning, and like not as individuals, not these individual monuments or monuments of individual people, but collective mourning. And, and because I'm so interested in Black people, I'm interested in what a collective mourning for Black people in particular looks like, because I feel like we are mourning a lot of things in a very different way from anybody else, in this country, and have been, thinking about Greenwood. You mentioned Greenwood, and so now I'm still been thinking about it. We know that there's a history of huge, massive death, for Black folks. And so how have we been able to mourn that? Just in 2020 with the pandemic and the virus and all of the lives that have been lost, and a good number of those being Black and brown people, how do we collectively honor those people and mourn those people? I don't have an answer to that, but I think it's a great question and something that I've been thinking about too.
Yeah, I've been thinking about it as well. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Okay.
I was just gonna say I've been thinking about it as well too. I mean, you go to church on a Sunday, right? And that's, a lot of mourning and grief goes out in the church, right? And I think that, I'm thinking through what is the way to release, right? Like, and we release in moments where we're all gathering or dancing, right? Or which is not happening now. But if you go to like a house party at 4 a.m., that's also a way of mourning, right? In the movements, right? Or letting out release, right? It's this, because mourning isn't just about the tears. The mourning is also about like what comes out on the other side, right? Or like the emotional journey of the tears to to the euphoria, to the celebration of a person, to the, you know, there's stages of the grief that I think that is interesting to consider when thinking through, like, what would the aesthetic experience be? But I feel like it should just be, right? Like, this is something that's happening naturally already, like the rituals that already exist.
Mhm.
I want to add that I think this question of collective mourning is so important with the pandemic and coronavirus. There's been so much death and individualized death where there was no ritual. Your family can't see you. You're kind of buried in a hurry, and there has been no time to reflect and to kind of sit with your loved one at this moment. And so, and this has been multiplied over over 200,000 people now. And so I mean, after this pandemic, it might be one of the most important questions to kind of come up against as people in this space, and thinking about collective mourning. I don't like Tatyana said, I don't have an answer, but I think it's something we should really think about because of the loss that we've had over the last year.
And I think Ada makes a great point that it's not just grief doesn't look just one way, you know, we experience it differently and there's different parts of it. There's the anger part of it. There is the, you know, the acceptance, the joy, you know, that comes, the celebration. I think that that's beautiful to recognize that, you know, mourning doesn't always look like tears, you know. And in this moment, how do we do that when we don't have these sort of big gathering spaces where we can come together and mourn in these different types of ways? And it makes me think about my own work, you know. At the top of this, you know, I said that this is new for me, the mourning and the grieving, doing work around it. But a lot of my work is based in anger, and how much of that anger has to do with mourning, has to do with grieving that I never really considered before. Like, is making work out of anger still making work about mourning and about loss and about memory? And I think in some ways it is. So to sort of like make a nuanced conversation, I think that Ada makes a good point there about how mourning can look differently and how we're probably making work about it and collectively mourning in different ways. The protest, that's mourning, right? Going out to the street and burning shit down. Sorry, burning stuff down. Right, that's mourning, that's grieving. And, you know, and that's collectively, you know. So it is happening, you know, potentially, and it looks differently in different ways.
Agreed. We often say that to protest is to have an unyielding faith in the power and potential of just society. It is fundamentally about our collective culture. It is about our collective hope for what we do moving forward. And I just want to thank all of you for coming to this panel with open hearts, open minds, and presenting your work. And it's a blessing for me to get to know you, and I will be bugging all of you down the line as we continue to talk. But I just want to say thanks again. So I'm going to pass this off to Susie and Melinda. And thanks everyone out there for hearing us and letting us join you for a little bit.
Thank you, Bryan.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Bryan.
Thank you, Bryan, and thank you to our panelists, Cheyenne, Ada, and Tatyana, for an incredibly thoughtful and invigorating conversation this evening.
Yeah, I guess I'm a little speechless, which honestly doesn't actually happen very often. Yeah, I just am, yeah, I have things I'm supposed to be saying and I'm not saying them. Thank you guys so much. I just am really enthralled with your brilliance. Melinda, thank you. I do want to add some of Melinda's art that is up is very much about this moment and memorializing the love and things that we are missing in each other, I think. I don't know if you want to talk about it at all, Melinda. Okay. So thank you everyone for joining us. It's really been a pleasure. Please come back tomorrow. It's our last day of the festival. At 2:30, it is the Museum of Hidden City panel discussion with creator Michael Epstein and a remarkable young poet, Samuel Getachew, who wrote the script and narrated the augmented reality walking tour of the Fillmore. If you haven't had a chance to do the walking tour, you can download the app on your phone. We'll put the link in the chat. And then at 4:30, we have our last panel of the festival, but it's going to be amazing. It's called Where the Pavement Ends. The panelists include director of the film Where the Pavement Ends, Jane, I'm going to say her name wrong, Gilloily? Tonica Johnson, creator of the Folded Map Project on Segregation in Chicago, and Brandy T. Summers, author of Black in Place, about gentrification in Chocolate City, otherwise known as Washington, D.C., which is also my hometown. Another reminder, please take a moment to fill out surveys. It really does help us understand who we are reaching. If you enjoyed our program, we would love for you to share our events and tag us on social media, spread the word, all that good stuff. Come see all of these amazing people's work and Melinda's work down at YBCA if you're in the Bay Area. We'll have more pictures and stuff online as well. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Melinda.
Thank you.
Good night.